I never thought owning a forklift would land me in the middle of a legal nightmare. But when Patricia Henderson from the HOA decided she could just take it whenever she wanted, everything spiraled into a mess that ended with criminal charges and a courtroom drama I'll never forget. My name is Brandon Lawson, and I run a small landscaping and construction supply business out of my property in Scottsdale, Arizona. The house sits on 2 acres, which is technically within the boundaries of the Sunset Ridge HOA, though my lot is one of the larger commercial residential hybrid properties that existed before the association was even formed back in 2008. When I bought the place in 2019, I made sure everything was documented properly. My business license was current, my zoning permits were in order, and I had explicit written permission to operate my equipment rental side business from the property. The forklift in question was a Caterpillar DP40N1, a serious piece of machinery worth about $45,000. I had purchased it 6 months earlier to expand my rental services, and it had been earning its keep nicely. Contractors in the area would rent it for $250 a day, and I had steady bookings. The machine sat in a fenced area on the far side of my property, locked up every night with the keys kept in my office safe. Patricia Henderson had been the HOA president for 3 years, and in that time, she had made it her personal mission to make my life difficult. She was 52 years old, with that particular haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," and an attitude that matched perfectly. Every month, there was something new. My fence was 2 inches too tall. My delivery trucks were parked inappropriately. My business signage violated some obscure aesthetic guideline she had probably written herself. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in my office doing paperwork when my phone rang. It was my neighbor, Robert Chen, who lived 3 houses down. "Brandon, I think you should know that Patricia just loaded something onto a trailer behind her SUV using your forklift," Robert said. "I was walking my dog and saw the whole thing. She definitely went into your fenced area." I stood up so fast my chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "She what?" "Yeah, man. She had the forklift running, loaded what looked like a bunch of landscaping stones onto a flatbed trailer, then drove off with the trailer. The forklift is still running in your yard. I can hear it from here." I grabbed my keys and ran outside. Sure enough, the gate to my equipment area was wide open, and my forklift was sitting there with the engine idling, the driver's seat empty. The lock on the gate had been cut clean through with bolt cutters. I could see the metal pieces lying in the gravel. My first instinct was to call Patricia directly. I pulled up the HOA contact list and dialed her number, my hands shaking with anger. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Yes." "Patricia, did you just take my forklift without permission?" "Oh, Brandon, I borrowed it for a community project. The HOA is installing a new monument sign at the entrance, and we needed to move some decorative boulders. I'll have it back in a few hours." I felt my blood pressure spike. "You broke into my locked equipment yard and took a $45,000 piece of machinery without asking me. That's theft. Don't be dramatic. It's community property. Everything within the HOA boundaries can be utilized for community improvement projects. It's in the bylaws." "That's absolutely not how it works, Patricia. That forklift is my private business property. You need to bring it back right now, and we need to talk about the fact that you cut my lock and trespassed. I'll return it when the project is complete. Stop being so selfish." "This is for everyone's benefit." She hung up. I stood there staring at my phone in disbelief. Then I did what I should have done first. I called the Scottsdale Police Department. Officer Martinez arrived 20 minutes later. He was a broad-shouldered guy in his mid-30s who took detailed notes as I explained the situation. I showed him the cut lock, the gate, and the forklift still running in my yard. Robert came over and confirmed what he had witnessed. "So she admitted to taking it when you called her?" Officer Martinez asked. "Yes. She said she was borrowing it for HOA business and that she'd return it in a few hours, but she broke my lock and entered my property without permission. I never gave her access to my equipment." Officer Martinez nodded. Given the value of the equipment and the circumstances, this could potentially be prosecuted as grand theft. In Arizona, theft of property valued over $25,000 is a Class 2 felony. I'm going to file a report, and I recommend you document everything. Take photos, get witness statements, and gather any security footage you might have. That last part reminded me. I had recently installed security cameras around the equipment area after some kids had been throwing rocks over the fence. I pulled up the footage on my phone right there and showed it to the officer. The video was crystal clear. At 8:47 a.m., Patricia's white Lexus SUV pulled up to my gate. She got out, looked around nervously, then pulled bolt cutters from her trunk. She cut the lock, opened the gate, and walked directly to my office shed where I kept spare keys in what I thought was a hidden location. She searched for about 3 minutes before finding them. Then she climbed into the forklift, started it up, and spent the next 15 minutes carefully maneuvering it to lift several large boulders onto a trailer she had backed into my property. "Can you send me a copy of that footage?" Officer Martinez asked. "Absolutely." He spent another 30 minutes taking statements and measurements. By the time he left, he had assured me that a detective would be following up, and that they would be contacting Patricia about returning the forklift and addressing the theft charges. I turned off the forklift and secured it as best as I could with a new lock I had in my storage. Then I called my insurance company, and my lawyer, my attorney, David Kim, had handled my business incorporation and zoning issues when I first started. He listened to my story and immediately understood the severity. "This is bad, Brandon. She essentially committed burglary and grand theft, and you have it on video. The fact that she's HOA president doesn't give her any special rights to your property. I'm going to draft a formal demand letter, but honestly, this is going to go criminal before civil. What should I do right now? Document everything. Don't touch anything she touched until police have processed it if they want to. Save all communications. And do not, under any circumstances, let her back on your property." That afternoon, Patricia showed up at my front door. I watched her through the window as she rang the doorbell 3 times. I didn't answer. Instead, I recorded her on my phone as she stood there, getting increasingly agitated. She finally yelled through the door, "Brandon, I know you're in there. We need to discuss this like adults. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." I texted her instead of opening the door. "Do not come back to my property. Return the forklift immediately or I will pursue full legal action." She texted back within seconds. "It's being returned tomorrow. You're overreacting. I'm calling an emergency HOA board meeting about your attitude and lack of community spirit." The next day, Wednesday, a flatbed delivery truck showed up at noon. 2 workers unloaded my forklift and left it in my driveway. I immediately inspected it for damage. There was a new dent on the left fork and hydraulic fluid leaking from a hose that had clearly been strained beyond its capacity. The hour meter showed she had used it for 4.5 hours. I took photographs of everything, then called a forklift mechanic I knew. He came out that same afternoon and assessed the damage at $3,200 in repairs. The hydraulic hose had been damaged, and the fork had been bent slightly, requiring replacement. He wrote up a detailed estimate, On Thursday, I received a formal letter from the HOA. It was signed by Patricia and the other 3 board members, Cheryl, Mark, and Linda. The letter stated that I was being fined $500 for operating commercial equipment in a manner that disturbs the peace and aesthetics of the community, and another $500 for failure to maintain cooperative community relations. I forwarded the letter to David immediately. He called me back within an hour, laughing. "They can't be serious. They steal your equipment, damage it, and then fine you. This is going to look terrible for them." "What do I do?" "Nothing. Don't pay the fines. I'll respond formally." Meanwhile, the detective should be contacting you soon about pressing charges. Detective Sarah Walsh called me Friday morning. She was with the Scottsdale Police Department's Property Crimes Division and had reviewed Officer Martinez's report along with all my documentation. "Mr. Lawson, I've looked over everything, and I believe we have sufficient evidence to pursue charges against Patricia Henderson. The video footage is particularly damning. However, I need to ask you some questions for my investigation." We met at my property that afternoon. Detective Walsh was thorough, asking about my relationship with Patricia, the HOA history, my business operations, and every detail of the incident. She examined the cut lock, reviewed the camera footage again, and took copies of all my documentation. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "I'm going to present this case to the county attorney's office. Based on the value of the forklift and the circumstances, they'll likely charge her with theft of means of transportation and criminal trespassing at minimum. The theft charge is a Class 3 felony in Arizona because it involves a motor vehicle or piece of equipment. If convicted, she could face up to 8.5 years in prison, though first-time offenders usually get probation and restitution. "I just want my equipment secure and the damage paid for," I said. "Understandable. But this is beyond just civil restitution now. She committed a serious crime. The state will prosecute regardless of whether you want to pursue it civilly." Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated rapidly. The county attorney's office filed formal charges against Patricia Henderson. 1 count of theft of means of transportation, a Class 3 felony, and 1 count of criminal trespassing in the 2nd degree, a Class 2 misdemeanor. Patricia was arrested at her home on a Tuesday morning. I heard about it from Robert, who heard it from another neighbor who watched the police arrive with an arrest warrant. She was processed, had her mugshot taken, and was released on a $5,000 bond that same day. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded. People were divided. Half thought Patricia had overstepped terribly and deserved everything coming to her. The other half thought I was being vindictive and should have just accepted her apology and moved on. Except she had never actually apologized. On Wednesday, Patricia's attorney, a woman named Rebecca Foster, called me. "Mr. Lawson, my client is willing to pay for the damage to your equipment and offer a formal apology if you'll speak to the prosecutor about dropping the charges. The charges are criminal. I don't control whether they're dropped or not. You could tell them you don't wish to cooperate with the prosecution. Your client stole a $45,000 piece of equipment, damaged it, and then tried to fine me. She showed no remorse until she got arrested. I'm going to cooperate fully with the prosecution." Rebecca sighed. "Mr. Lawson, Patricia has no criminal record. This will ruin her life. She should have thought about that before she cut my lock and stole my forklift." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for early April. I was subpoenaed to testify, along with Robert and the forklift mechanic, who had assessed the damage. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Patricia sat at the defense table with Rebecca Foster, wearing a conservative blue suit and minimal makeup, clearly trying to look sympathetic. She didn't make eye contact with me, The prosecutor, Assistant County Attorney James Morrison, was a sharp guy in his early 40s. He had prepared thoroughly and walked the judge through the entire case methodically. "Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. We have video footage of Miss Henderson cutting the lock, entering Mr. Lawson's property without permission, locating his keys, and operating his forklift to move materials for her personal project. She never sought permission. She never notified him. She committed theft of means of transportation, which is a Class 3 felony under Arizona Revised Statutes Section 13-1814. Rebecca Foster argued that Patricia had believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president and that there was no criminal intent. My client genuinely believed the HOA bylaws gave her the right to utilize property within the community for community improvement projects. This is a civil matter that has been blown out of proportion. Judge Richard Coleman was unimpressed. "Counselor, the video shows your client cutting a lock with bolt cutters and searching for keys. That doesn't suggest someone operating under a good faith belief in their authority. That suggests someone who knew exactly what they were doing." The preliminary hearing lasted about 90 minutes. At the end, Judge Coleman ruled there was sufficient probable cause to proceed to trial and scheduled it for mid-May. As we left the courtroom, Patricia finally approached me in the hallway. Rebecca tried to stop her, but Patricia brushed her off. "Brandon, please. Can we talk about this reasonably? You stole my equipment, Patricia. You damaged it. You showed zero remorse. What is there to talk about? I made a mistake. I'm sorry. But do you really want to ruin my life over this? I could go to prison." "You should have thought about the consequences before you committed a felony." Her face hardened. "You know what? Fine. I tried to be nice. But if you want to play this game, the HOA will make your life hell. We'll fine you for every tiny violation. We'll make it impossible for you to do business." Rebecca grabbed Patricia's arm. "Stop talking, right now." I looked at Patricia calmly. "You just threatened me in front of witnesses, including your own attorney. Good luck with that." Rebecca literally dragged Patricia away, apologizing over her shoulder. James Morrison had heard the whole thing. He shook his head. "Some people never learn. I'll make sure that interaction goes in my notes." The next few weeks were tense. The HOA did exactly what Patricia had threatened. I received violation notices for things that had never been problems before. My grass was allegedly a quarter-inch too tall. My trash cans were visible from the street for 10 minutes after pickup. My business van was parked at the wrong angle in my driveway. Each violation came with a $100 fine. David Kim sent a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA board, pointing out that the violations were clearly retaliatory, and that we would be filing a lawsuit for harassment if they continued. Interestingly, 2 of the board members resigned immediately after receiving that letter. Mark and Linda both sent apologetic emails saying they wanted no part in Patricia's vendetta, and hadn't realized the full extent of what she had done with the forklift. That left Patricia and Cheryl running the HOA board, which needed at least 3 members to function under the bylaws. The trial began on May 18th. The courtroom was more crowded this time. Several neighbors showed up, some supporting me and others supporting Patricia. Local news had picked up the story because HOA president charged with stealing forklift made for compelling headlines. Jury selection took most of the first day. By the afternoon, we had 12 jurors and 2 alternates. The trial was expected to last 3 days. James Morrison's opening statement was straightforward. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about theft. Plain and simple. The defendant, Patricia Henderson, cut a lock, entered private property without permission, took a piece of equipment worth $45,000, used it without authorization, and returned it damaged. The evidence will show, beyond any reasonable doubt, that she committed theft of means of transportation and criminal trespassing. Rebecca Foster's opening statement focused on Patricia's state of mind. Patricia Henderson is not a criminal. She's a dedicated community volunteer who made an error in judgment. She genuinely believed, based on her interpretation of the HOA bylaws, that she had the authority to use equipment within the community for community improvement. Was she wrong? Yes. But being wrong about the law doesn't make someone a criminal. This is a civil dispute that should never have become a criminal case. The prosecution's case was devastating. James called me as his first witness. I walked through everything methodically. I explained my business, the forklift purchase, my security measures, and exactly what happened that Tuesday morning. I identified Patricia in the courtroom. I verified the authenticity of the security footage, which was played for the jury on large monitors. Watching it again, even I had to admit it looked bad. You could clearly see Patricia looking around nervously, cutting the lock with deliberate effort, and searching for the keys. There was no way to interpret that as someone acting in good faith. Rebecca's cross-examination tried to paint me as uncooperative and vindictive. Mr. Lawson, isn't it true that you've had multiple disputes with the HOA over the years? The HOA has sent me violation notices that I've disputed, yes. And isn't it true that you resent the HOA's authority? I resent when the HOA oversteps its authority, which is what happened here. When Miss Henderson called to explain she was borrowing the forklift, you immediately threatened legal action rather than discussing it reasonably, didn't you? She didn't ask permission before taking it. She called after she had already stolen it. I didn't threaten anything. I stated facts. But you could have simply accepted her explanation and let her finish the project, couldn't you? No, I couldn't. She had committed theft. The fact that she planned to return it doesn't change that. Robert testified next, confirming what he had witnessed. The forklift mechanic testified about the damage and the repair costs. Officer Martinez testified about the initial report and Patricia's admission over the phone that she had taken the forklift. Then Detective Walsh testified about her investigation and the evidence she had gathered. The prosecution rested after 2 days. Rebecca's defense case was weak. She called Patricia to the stand, which seemed risky. Patricia testified that she had genuinely believed the HOA bylaws gave her authority to use any property within the community boundaries for community projects. She claimed she had consulted with another HOA president from a different community who had told her this was common practice. James destroyed her on cross-examination. Miss Henderson, you testified that you believed you had the authority to use Mr. Lawson's forklift. Is that correct? Yes. Then why did you cut the lock instead of asking him for permission? Patricia hesitated. I knew he would say no. He's very uncooperative with the HOA. So you knew you needed his permission, but you decided to take it anyway because you assumed he'd refuse. It's more complicated than that. Is it? You cut a lock with bolt cutters. You searched his office for keys. You took equipment worth tens of thousands of dollars. Those aren't the actions of someone operating with permission, are they? I was going to return it. Theft doesn't stop being theft just because you plan to return the item, does it? Rebecca objected, but the damage was done. James continued. You testified that you consulted with another HOA president who said this was common practice. Who was that? Her name is Deanne Martin. She's president of the Evergreen Valley HOA. And did you get that advice in writing? No, it was a phone conversation. Did you record it? No. So we only have your word that this conversation happened. Yes, but it did happen. And even if it did this Deanne Martin tell you it was okay to cut locks and take equipment without permission? Patricia's face flushed. She said we had broad authority for community projects. That's not what I asked. Did she specifically tell you to cut locks and take equipment without permission? No. So you made that decision entirely on your own? I suppose so. James pulled out a document. Miss Henderson, I'm showing you a copy of the Sunset Ridge HOA bylaws. Can you point to the section that gives you authority to take residents' private property for HOA projects? Patricia flipped through the pages, her hands shaking slightly. It's implied in the General Authority section. Please read the General Authority section aloud for the jury. Patricia read, her voice quiet. The HOA board has authority to maintain common areas, enforce community standards, and coordinate community improvement projects within designated HOA property. It says designated HOA property, doesn't it? Yes. Is Mr. Lawson's equipment yard designated HOA property? It's within the HOA boundaries. That's not what I asked. Is his equipment yard common property that the HOA owns? No. So this section doesn't give you authority to take his property, does it? I interpreted it differently. You interpreted it to mean you could cut locks and steal equipment, Rebecca objected loudly. Argumentative, Judge Coleman sustained the objection but told James to continue. Miss Henderson, after you returned the forklift and Mr. Lawson informed you of the damage, did you offer to pay for repairs? I was going to, but then he filed charges and everything escalated. James pulled out another document. I'm showing you an HOA letter dated 3 days after the incident. This letter, signed by you, fines Mr. Lawson $1,000 for various violations. Is this your signature? Yes. So rather than apologizing or offering to pay for damages, you fined him. Those were legitimate violations. Violations that had never been cited before, correct? They had become noticeable. Or you were retaliating against him for reporting your theft. Objection. Withdrawn. No further questions. Rebecca tried to rehabilitate Patricia on redirect, but the damage was done. Patricia looked defensive and entitled, exactly the opposite of what the defense needed. The defense rested without calling any other witnesses. Closing arguments happened on day 3. James was concise and powerful. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case is clear. Patricia Henderson cut a lock. She entered private property without permission. She took a $45,000 piece of equipment. She used it for hours. She returned it damaged, and when confronted, she showed no remorse. Instead, she retaliated with fines. These are not the actions of someone who made an innocent mistake. These are the actions of someone who believed she was above the rules. The law doesn't have a special exemption for HOA presidents. She committed theft. You must hold her accountable. Rebecca's closing focused on intent and proportionality. Patricia Henderson made a mistake. She misunderstood her authority, but she never intended to permanently deprive Mr. Lawson of his property. She used it for a community project and returned it. Yes, it was damaged and she should pay for that, but that's a civil matter, not a criminal one. Sending Patricia to prison would be a gross injustice. She has no criminal record. She's a devoted community volunteer. She deserves your mercy. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and read the verdict. On the count of theft of means of transportation, we find the defendant guilty. Patricia's face went white. On the count of criminal trespassing in the 2nd degree, we find the defendant guilty. Patricia started crying. Rebecca put an arm around her shoulders. Judge Coleman set a sentencing hearing for 3 weeks later and remanded Patricia on the same bond terms. As I left the courthouse, a reporter from the local news approached me. Mr. Lawson, how do you feel about the verdict? I feel like justice was served. No one is above the law, not even HOA presidents. You have any sympathy for Miss Henderson? I have sympathy for anyone facing consequences for their actions, but she made her choices. She could have asked permission. She could have apologized. She chose not to. The sentencing hearing was on June 9th. James Morrison asked for prison time and full restitution. Rebecca Foster begged for probation and community service. Judge Coleman's sentence was harsh but fair. Miss Henderson, you abused a position of trust. You committed a serious crime and then tried to cover it with retaliation. I'm sentencing you to 3 years of supervised probation, 300 hours of community service, and full restitution to Mr. Lawson for damages and legal fees. Additionally, you are prohibited from serving on any HOA board or in any similar position of community authority during your probation. Then came the restitution calculation. James had submitted a detailed accounting. The forklift repairs were $3,200. My attorney fees were $12,000. The loss of rental income during the weeks the forklift was out of service was $4,800. Court costs and miscellaneous expenses brought the total to $23,700. But Arizona law also allows for punitive damages in theft cases where the defendant acted with malice or recklessness. James argued successfully that Patricia's retaliation with fines demonstrated malice. Judge Coleman doubled the restitution amount as a punitive measure, bringing the total to $47,400. Then he added court-ordered fees and costs of another $2,600. The final amount Patricia owed me was exactly $50,000. She would have 5 years to pay it, with monthly payments of $833. Patricia collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Rebecca tried to comfort her, but Patricia was inconsolable. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt no satisfaction. I felt tired. This whole thing had been exhausting and unnecessary. Robert was waiting for me outside. "Hey, man, congrats, I guess." "Thanks, I just want to get back to normal." "Think the HOA will leave you alone now? They don't have much choice. Patricia is gone and half the board quit. They'll have to rebuild with reasonable people." And that's exactly what happened. Within a month, the HOA held new elections. 3 new board members were elected, all of whom ran on platforms of reasonable governance and no harassment. The new president, a retired accountant named Thomas, reached out to me personally to apologize for everything that had happened and to assure me there would be no more frivolous violations. Patricia made her first payment in July, exactly $833. I deposited it without comment. Over the next few months, life returned to normal. My business continued doing well. The forklift was repaired and back in service. I even rented it to the HOA once for a legitimate project with a proper contract and insurance certificate. Patricia moved out of the neighborhood in September. Robert heard she had taken a job in Flagstaff and was starting over. Part of me hoped she had learned something from the experience. The HOA dissolved the ridiculous fines they had issued me, and even issued a formal letter of apology that was distributed to all residents, explaining what had happened and committing to better governance going forward. I framed that letter and hung it in my office, not as a trophy but as a reminder. A reminder that standing up for yourself matters, that no one, regardless of their position or title, has the right to take what isn't theirs. And that sometimes doing the right thing means holding people accountable, even when it's difficult. Looking back now, almost a year later, I don't regret how I handled things. Could I have been more forgiving? Maybe. But Patricia had every opportunity to make things right, and she chose escalation instead. She chose retaliation instead of responsibility. The $50,000 she ended up paying wasn't just about the money. It was about consequences. It was about the principle that actions have repercussions, and that being in a position of authority doesn't exempt you from the law. My forklift still sits in that same fenced area, now with an even better security system. I upgraded the cameras to 4K resolution and added motion sensing floodlights. The new lock is industrial grade and would take someone 20 minutes to cut through, assuming they had professional equipment. But more importantly, the new HOA board respects boundaries. They understand that their authority extends to common areas and genuine community issues, not to residents' private property and businesses. Thomas, the new president, and I actually became friendly. He stops by sometimes to chat about neighborhood issues and genuinely asks for input rather than dictating from on high. It's amazing what a difference reasonable people can make. The whole experience taught me valuable lessons about documentation, security, and standing firm when you're in the right. I've since helped 2 other small business owners in the area who were dealing with HOA overreach, sharing my story and my attorney's contact information. One of them, a woman named Sarah who runs a pottery studio from her home, was being harassed by her HOA for having a kiln in her garage. After she showed them my case and stood her ground with proper legal backing, they backed off completely. She sent me a beautiful handmade vase as a thank you, which now sits on my mantle. The security footage of Patricia cutting my lock and taking the forklift has been viewed over 2 million times on YouTube. Someone had leaked it to a channel that covers HOA horror stories, and it became a viral sensation. The comments section is full of people sharing their own HOA nightmares and praising me for fighting back. I never sought that attention, but I'm glad the story resonated with people. It seems like everyone has either experienced HOA overreach themselves or knows someone who has. The more these stories get told, the more awareness builds about the need for HOA reform and accountability. Several states have since introduced legislation to add more oversight to HOA boards and create clearer avenues for residents to challenge abuse of power. I was even invited to testify before the Arizona State Legislature about my experience. That was surreal, sitting in the Capitol building in Phoenix, telling my story to lawmakers who were genuinely interested in creating change. The bill that resulted from those hearings, which passed in August, creates a state-level ombudsman office for HOA disputes and requires board members to complete training on the legal limits of their authority. It also establishes penalties for HOAs that engage in retaliatory actions against residents who file legitimate complaints. I like to think Patricia's case helped make that happen. Sometimes one person's bad decisions can lead to positive change for thousands of others. As for Patricia, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she completed her community service requirement by working at a food bank in Flagstaff. She's apparently been making her monthly payments on time and has stayed out of trouble. I hope she's found some peace and perspective. I don't hate her. I never did. I was angry at her actions and frustrated by her entitlement, but I never wished her genuine harm. I just wanted accountability and I got it. The criminal record will follow her forever, which is unfortunate, but that's the reality of committing a felony. Background checks will show her conviction. Job applications will be harder. She'll have to explain what happened whenever it comes up. Those are heavy consequences, and part of me does feel sympathy for that burden. But then, I remember that she had so many chances to make different choices. She could have knocked on my door and asked to rent the forklift. She could have apologized immediately when I called. She could have offered to pay for damages right away. She could have accepted responsibility instead of retaliating with fines. Every step of the way, she chose the path that led to her conviction. I didn't put her in that situation. She put herself there. My business has actually grown since all of this happened. The publicity, while uncomfortable at times, brought in new customers who appreciated my stand for property rights and fair dealing. My equipment rental side of the business has expanded significantly. I've added 2 more pieces of equipment, a small excavator and a telehandler, both of which stay booked solid. I hired an employee, a young guy named Marcus who had just graduated from a technical college with a degree in heavy equipment operation. He helps manage the rental schedule, maintains the equipment, and handles deliveries. It's nice to have help and to be able to provide someone with a good job. The extra income allowed me to finally take a vacation. I spent 2 weeks in Colorado last October, hiking and camping and not thinking about forklifts or HOAs or legal battles. It was exactly what I needed. When I came back, there was a letter waiting for me from Patricia. It had been forwarded from my attorney's office. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten, 3 pages long. She apologized extensively, taking full responsibility for her actions. She explained that she had been going through some personal issues at the time, stress at work and problems in her marriage, and that she had channeled that stress into controlling behavior as HOA president. She acknowledged that none of that excused what she did. She wrote that the criminal case and its consequences had been devastating but ultimately necessary. She said it had forced her to confront patterns in her behavior that she had been ignoring for years. She had started therapy and was working on herself in ways she should have years ago. The letter ended with a simple statement. "I hope someday you can forgive me. I understand if you can't. Thank you for holding me accountable when no one else would." I read that letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in a drawer in my desk. I haven't responded, and I'm not sure I will. But I appreciated that she wrote it. It showed a level of self-awareness and genuine remorse that had been completely absent during the initial incident and even during the trial. Maybe she really has changed. Maybe the experience broke through whatever wall of entitlement had been governing her actions. I hope so, for her sake. Forgiveness is complicated. I'm not angry anymore, which is probably a form of forgiveness in itself. But I'm also not ready to reach out and tell her everything is fine because it wasn't fine. What she did had real consequences for me, financially and emotionally. The stress of those months was significant, but I've moved on. My life is good. The neighborhood is peaceful. The HOA is functional and reasonable. Business is thriving. I'm dating someone I met at a Chamber of Commerce mixer, a marketing consultant named Rachel, who thinks the whole forklift saga is simultaneously appalling and hilarious. Life has a way of working out when you stand up for yourself and refuse to be pushed around. That's the real lesson here. Not the legal victory or the restitution or the viral video. The lesson is that you have to defend your boundaries and your rights, even when it's difficult, even when people call you unreasonable or vindictive. I protected my property and my business. I refused to let someone abuse their authority to victimize me. And when I had the chance to let it slide for the sake of neighborhood peace, I chose accountability instead. That choice led to months of stress and conflict. It led to court appearances and legal fees and uncomfortable confrontations. It would have been easier to just let Patricia pay for the damages and move on. But easier isn't always right. And in this case, holding her accountable wasn't just about me. It was about every other resident she might have targeted. It was about establishing clear boundaries for what HOA boards can and cannot do. It was about proving that title and position don't grant immunity from consequences. The $50,000 Patricia is paying me over 5 years represents something much bigger than money. It represents justice. It represents the principle that no one gets to steal from you just because they wear a title. And that's a principle worth fighting for, even when the fight is exhausting. So here I am, a year later, running my business, living my life, and occasionally thinking about that Tuesday morning when Patricia cut my lock and took my forklift. It seems almost surreal now, like something that happened to someone else. But the new lock on my gate reminds me it was real. The upgraded security system reminds me it was real. The monthly payments hitting my account remind me it was real. And somewhere in Flagstaff, Patricia is reminded too. Every time she makes a payment, every time she fills out a job application and has to check the box about criminal convictions, every time she explains to someone new what happened and why, we're both living with the consequences of her choices that day. The difference is, I'm thriving despite them while she's still struggling because of them. That's not something I take pleasure in, but it is reality. Justice doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it just feels necessary. And in this case, it was absolutely necessary. I never wanted to be the guy who sent an HOA president to criminal court over a forklift. But I also wasn't going to be the guy who let someone steal $45,000 worth of equipment and then fine him for complaining about it. So I became the guy who stood up, documented everything, and let the legal system work exactly as it was designed to work. And you know what? I do it again, without hesitation, because property rights matter, personal boundaries matter, and holding people accountable for their actions, regardless of their position or title, matters most of all. That's the story of how Karen tried using my forklift for free, and ended up convicted of grand theft and ordered to pay $50,000. It's a story about theft and justice, about abuse of power and accountability, about an HOA president who thought she was above the rules and a small business owner who proved she wasn't. It's also a story with a clear message: respect other people's property, respect boundaries, and understand that every action has consequences. Patricia learned that lesson the hard way. I hope others can learn it from her example instead of their own experience. The forklift is still earning its keep, booked solid most weeks. My business is stronger than ever. The neighborhood is peaceful. And justice, however imperfect and complicated, was served. That's really all anyone can ask for.